Good morning. We'll be learning the daf of Tractate Eruvin, daf 15, Tesvav, and we'll be in the first chapter. Is Movishu Gavoy is the name of the chapter. We'll start from the top. The Gemara discusses the validity of a side post that was not especially erected to serve as a lechi. Side post that somebody just put in there, not for a lechi. Not to create the movay, not to make the movay per se shusayochid or place that we can carry. Itma lechem with melo side post that stand by itself. Bayamor havelechi, Rabamor lavelechi. Rabbi said it is valid lechi. Rabbi said it's not. Where he did not rely on it from the day before. If nobody relied on this lechi before, everyone agreed that it's not considered a lechi. When did the Abai and Rava debate? Argue some did rely on this before Shabbos. They relied on this side post before the onset of Shabbos. One intended that this already standing side post should function as a lechi. So in this case, it's considered a lechi because I relied on it from the other day. Rabbi said it's not considered a lechi, even though you relied on that from the other day. You relied on the side post to serve as a lechi. Since initially it was erected not for lechi, that wasn't the intention when it was erected, then it's not a valid lechi. It was taught that just as they, Abai and Rava, argue in regard to lechi, so they argue also in regard to a partition. Similarly, if it was not erected to serve the partition, there should not be a partition. If you relied on it, then Abai and Rava debate whether it's good partition or not. If it was not made for partition, Rava would say that it's not good. Abai would say it's okay. Tashmais sukkos benaylones. If one makes a sukkah among the trees, sukkah surrounded by trees, and the trees are serving as its walls. The sukkah is valid, even though the trees were apparently not placed there initially. He's taking advantage, so to speak, of the trees that were there before. So the Mishnah states that they may be used for this purpose. So this apparently supports Abaye, and this approves Rava's view. Because Rava says, no, the intention needs to be there to begin with. Over here, it's a proof that the intention doesn't have to be there. So the Gemara rejects this proof. So it says, what is the case? With what case are we dealing here where he planted them initially for this purpose? That was the purpose. So therefore, it proves Rava's view. Rava would agree. If the intention was there at the beginning, that's the same case over here. If the lechi, the side post, the intention was there, Rava would say that it's okay. The problem with the side post that the intention was not there to begin with. You may afterwards thought, I would like to use it as a lechi, but since the intention was not there, when the side post was installed, then Rava would say that it's not good. So this is not proving anything, because it says in the case of Sukkah that he also did it to begin with, meaning he planted those trees to serve as walls for the Sukkah. The Gemara says, Yachib Shita. If the trees were initially planted to serve as walls, it's obvious that it's kosher. Why do you have to tell me? You might have said, so the reason why the Gemara mentioned it, because we should enact a safeguard in validating trees as sukkah walls. out of concern that perhaps one will come to use the trees on the festival. Kamashvan, and therefore the Mishnah teaches us that no such safeguard, there's no concern that he would use them, and the trees may indeed be used as sukkah walls. I'm going to read a note for 4. It says it is rabbinically forbidden to climb, place object, or even lean on a tree on the Shabbos or festivals, for fear that one will come to detach part of it and thereby violate the forbidden labor of reaping. Gemara in Beitzos 36b. Perhaps as further safeguard, the rabbis forbade using trees as walls for a sukkah. But Gemara tells us no, it's okay. Although the concern is there, but we're not worried that he would use it, that he would use the trunk of the trees in a forbidden way. Tashma, if there was a tree or fence or a wall of reeds standing at one of more of the corners of a wall enclosure, it is adjudged to be a valid double board. So one side you have a tree or fence or a wall of reeds. We're judging it as a double board. The Baisa apparently validated tree or line of reeds that happens to be found, properly positioned at the corner of a wall enclosure, even though it was not initially placed there to serve as partition. This apparently supports Abaye and disapproves Rava's view. Achanami. It's the same answer like we said about the sukkah. He made it for this purpose. So what do you come to teach us? What's the chiddush? If you already made it for that, then what's the chiddush? It teaches us the validity of a wall of reeds consisting of reeds spaced less than 3 tefachim apart. So they're not per se a wall, they are apart from each other. Is in fact Abaye asked Rava on 19b. Abaye asked Rava whether such a wall could be used as a double board. Rava answered that this Baisa, which validates a wall of reeds, validates just such a double board. Tashma ilan a tree that forms a canopy over the ground. A tree that forms a canopy over the ground, meaning branches emanating from the trunk at a height of 10 tefachim or more droop down. You can see it, I guess, with usually with vines, but in this case, the branches were coming all the way down and enclose the area below. If the tips of its branches are not raised 3 tefachim from the ground, one may carry underneath this tree, because it's like this tree formed a private domain. One may carry underneath it, since the branches form a valid partitions. The Baisa's validation of branches that happen to form partitions supports Abaye and disapproves Rava's view. Again, something that no one intended for it to happen, and it happened. Still, we rule that it's considered a partition. So the Gemara answers, it was planted where one planted the tree initially for this purpose, that its branches should enclose the area below to serve as a shelter for the watchmen who come to guard the surrounding fields. Therefore, even Rava agrees that they are valid partitions. So, if so, that the tree was planted for this purpose, it should be permitted to carry in its entire enclosed area regardless of how large it is. But there is a limitation of how much we can carry under this tree. It says, Ravuna Breid Rav Yeshua, Ravuna the son of Yeshua said, one may not carry in the branch enclosure unless it is no larger than 2 beis seah. How much is 2 beis seah? There's a number 9. Although biblically the area of 4 tvachim or larger that is enclosed by a valid partition is a reshus hayochid, is a private domain, the rabbi said a maximum area of 2 beis seah, which is 5,000 square amis. For any enclosure that is substandard, either in structure or in function. So this is a substandard. It's not a usual thing. This limitation, so 5,000 amis, 2 beis seah. Now, this limitation should not apply if the tree was planted with the intent that its branches form a shelter for people. Because if the intention was there, it's not substandard. The Gemara answers that this is not considered a true residential enclosure. Mishum dehave dirosh tashmish lav. It is a dwelling whose function is to serve as an open area. Meaning, the watchmen live there not out of choice, but only because they must guard the surrounding fields. And any dwelling whose function is to serve the open area beyond it, and one may not carry in it unless it is no larger than 2 beis seah. Okay. Tashma shovas betel shugava. So, if one made his Shabbos residence on a mound, it's a pile of dirt that is 10 tvachim high, and it is between 4 ames by 4 ames square, and 2 beis seah in area. And similarly, if he made his Shabbos residence in a cleft of a rock that is 10 tefachim deep, and it is between 4 ames by 4 ames square, and 2 beis seah in area. Or if he made his Shabbos residence in a clearing of reaped grain, with standing stalks that are 10 tefachim high surround, forming an enclosure. In all these cases, so we have 3 cases over here. Tel shu gavoya, a mound, that was number 1, still 4 by 4 by 2 seahs, or nekah, which is a hole inside a rock, cleft of a rock, again 10 tefachim deep, 4 by 4 and 2 seahs, or kama kitzur. Kama kitzur is in the middle of the field, the area that is harvested, ripped, and is surrounded by stalks that are 10 tefachim high. So it's an enclosure. So he may travel the entire enclosure and beyond it, 2,000 ames, since when one makes his Shabbos residence in an enclosure, the entire enclosure is treated as his immediate 4 ames. That's your 4 ames. Beyond which starts the 2,000 ames that he permitted to travel. So we see that structures which happen to form partitions are valid partitions, even though they were not initially intended for that purpose. That's a proof for a bite. Here too, the case that he harvested to create an enclosure. You might argue the same way like we did so far. Granted that for the case of grain, all is well with such an assertion that he made for himself. You can answer that. But in the case of tel, in the case of a mound, in the case of neka, of a cleft inside the rock, Michael, maybe you can't say that he made a hole in the rock for that purpose. These are not man-made partitions that we should be able to explain that they were initially made to be used as walls. If we assume that the dispute between Abaye and Rava involves not only an already standing lechi, but an already standing partition as well, Rava's view would be disproven from this last brisa. Therefore, the Gemara concludes, Ela mechitzas kulam ulu pligi dav mechitza. Rather, we must say that in regard to partitions, no one disagrees that it is a valid partition, even if was initially made to function as such. They only disagree about lechi, not about partition. Only in regard to lechi. The Gemara explains the respective reasons for the view of Abaye and Rava. Abaye Tamei. Abaye has his reason why he validates the side post that was already there and already standing lechi is consistent with his own view. What was the view of Abaye? The Omar lechi mishum mechitza. He says elsewhere that lechi serves primarily the partition of the mother's open side. It's considered like partition. And he holds that partition that is made by itself, it is properly positioned, but was not initially made as partition. It is a valid partition. It's there, even though it wasn't my intention. The fact that it's there, it does the job. Rava Tamei, and Rava, who disqualifies an already standing lechi, is consistent with his own view. The Omar lechi mishum heker, he said that the lechi serves as a heker, as a reminder, and if it's always there, it's not a reminder. If he made it himself, then it's going to be a heker for him. It's going to be something that he would recognize, something that reminds him something, a reminder. But if he didn't do it, even though it's there, it's not a heker. It was always there. Tashma, come learn a proof from the following. Vaisa. Avnei goder, the stones of a wall that protrude from the wall. Stones that are sticking out. You see it in the diagram below. In 15a3. If they are separated from each other by less than 3 tfachim. The Movid does not need a different lechi to adjust it, since the rule of Lavud allows us to view this series of protruding stones as an uninterrupted lechi. It's considered Lavud, the rule of Lavud, considering it as if it's not interrupted and it's one post. But if the stones are separated by 3 tfachim or more, the Movi needs a different lechi to adjust it, since the rule of Lavud does not apply to gaps of 3 tfachim or more. This brisa validates the protruding stones as a lechi when they are separated by less than 3 tfachim. Apparently confirms Abaye's view. What's Abaye's view? That a lechi does not have to be initially erected to serve as one. So Gemara would answer the same answer. Maybe he did build it for this purpose from the beginning, initially for this purpose, to serve as a lechi. Gemara says, it is obvious that it's kosher. Why do you have to tell me that it's kosher? You might have said the reason why it's valid because this pattern of stones looks as if it is made solely to join future construction. You want to add another bricks to it. That's why you built it that way. Kamashman, therefore, the Brisa teaches that it is in fact a valid lechi, even though you can argue that it was made to ultimately to join
more bricks to it. Another proof. Tashma, if a part of a movi's side, if part of a movi's side wall is indented. So there's indentation. There's areas that are sunk in. Whether it results in a lechi that is visible on the outside and flush on the inside. We already discussed a similar case a couple of days ago. Or whether it results in a lechi that is visible on the inside and flush on the outside. Nidon mishum lechi. It is adjudged to be a valid lechi. So this ba'isa validates a lechi that is part of the wall itself, even though it was apparently not made initially to serve as a lechi. This confirms Abaye's opinion. The Gemara rejects this proof. You can argue that he made it to begin with for this purpose. So that really supports Rava's view. Here too, the case is one in which one made the protrusion or indentation of the wall initially for this purpose, to serve as a lechi. If so, if it was initially made as a lechi, what's the chidush? What novel rule does the Baisa teach us? Why would I think that such a lechi is not valid? The Baisa teaches us that that a side post visible on the outside and flush on the inside. So maybe the people that are on the inside would not see it as a lechi. They wouldn't have the reminder or the partition. But regardless, it is a valid lechi. Side post visible on the outside and flush on the inside is adjudged to be a valid lechi. In 25 it says this law is not obvious. As a matter is actually a matter of dispute on 9b. So we discussed it on 9b. Case of indentation or protrusion, flushes on the inside or flushes on the outside. Tashma de Rav, come learn a proof from the following incident. Rav was one sitting in a certain move on Shabbos. Sitting in a move on Shabbos. Ravuna, his disciple, was sitting before him. So Rav said to his attendant, Zil aiseli kuzu de maya, go bring me a pitcher of water. By the time the attendant returned with a pitcher of water, the lechi that had been adjusted to the move fell down. Rav motioned him with his hand to stop carrying, since the move was now unadjusted, and the attendant remained in his place and did not continue to carry the water. Ravuna asked Rav, doesn't the master hold it is permitted to rely on the palm tree that is standing in the mavi entrance along the side wall as a lechi? Why then is carrying not permitted in the mavi? We have the palm tree. Amar, so Rav commented, the domi haim rabbanon kemandali poshin shishmaito. This Rabbi Rav Huna seems like one to whom people never explained the law. He is unaware of the following fundamental point of law, and that's why he's asking this question. Did we rely on this tree as a lechi from the day before? As stated above, all agree that an already standing lechi is valid only if it was designed or designated as a lechi before the onset of the Shabbos, which was not the case with the palm tree. That's why he didn't rely on it. He his attendant to continue carrying the pitcher of water. Time of the Samchina, and the reason that Rav disqualifies the palm tree as a lechi is that we do not rely on it from before the Shabbos. We didn't rely on this palm tree before the Shabbos. We relied on the lechi that ended up falling on Shabbos. Asam china navilechi, but had we relied on it from before the Shabbos, then it would be a valid lechi, even though it was not initially planted to be used as a lechi, which confirms Abai's view. But the Gemara considers an alternative understanding. Shall we say that Abai and Rava argue in cases where we have not relied on the lechi from before Shabbos? In both cases, he did not rely on it before Shabbos. Maybe this is just one way of maybe explaining the debate between Abai and Rava. One said the sidepost that was there from before Shabbos, and the intention was not for the Mavah, it was just there. And Abai said it's kosher, it's valid, and Rava said it's not. So maybe we should say that dealing with a case where they didn't rely on it before Shabbos. But if in cases where they relied on it as a lechi before Shabbos, it is a valid lechi, even according to Rava. Maybe we should say that. Accordingly, Rava's comment would confirm the view of Rava, and Rav's comment because he just said to Ravuna that the reason why I'm not telling my attendant to continue walking with a pitcher of water is because he didn't rely. We didn't rely on this palm tree. If we had relied on the palm tree before Shabbos, I would tell him to continue walking. Accordingly, Rav's comment would confirm the view of Rava and oppose the view of Abai. 27. This, however, would contradict the accepted tradition that the halacha follows Abai in this matter. The Gemara replies, this possibility should not enter your mind. 15a4. For there was a certain porch, balcony, at the home of Bar Chavu, which was supported by a pillar standing in the entrance of another maveh. The Havu pligi b'Abai v'Rava kuli shnayu, regarding which Abai and Rava argued all their years. Abai validated those posts as a lechi, that holding the porch, whereas Rava did not. This shows that their dispute involves cases in which the already standing lechi was designated as a lechi from before the Shabbos. It says in 29, for if Rava in fact validated an already standing lechi that has been relied upon from before the Shabbos, there would not have been a continuous argument. The lechi would have been valid once the people relied on it as such. Obviously, it's the post that was standing there all along. So this shows that Rava disagrees, even though you relied on it. The fact that it was not built for that purpose, it was built to hold on to the porch, to support the porch. So the fact that Rava continued to argue with Abai, it shows that his opinion is that it doesn't help you to rely on something that was there before Shabbos. But from just what we just saw before, halacha follows Abai, not Rava. Halacha follows Abai. It says on 30 that Alechi relied upon from before the Shabbos is valid, even if it was not initially erected to serve as a lechi. But if it has not been relied upon from before Shabbos, then an already standing lechi is not valid. Although an actual partition is valid even if it was never relied upon, a lechi is not a full partition. That's a Chidush HaMeiri. So over here, Chidush HaMeiri tells us that all of this machlokes and this whole page that we were learning, machlokes with Abai and Rava, it's only about a lechi. Lechi Aymed Me'elov. Lechi, that was a side post standing by itself. But it was a koiro which is viewed as a partition, would not be a problem. But if it has not, so it says, an already standing lech is not valid, although an actual partition is valid even if it was never relied upon. A lechi is not a full partition. Alternatively, even according to the view that a lechi functions as a partition, it must also serve somewhat as a reminder. Since the secondary function is lacking, it's not a reminder because it's always there. Since the secondary function is lacking in a lechi that was never relied upon, it is invalid. This is one of the 6 places in the Talmud where the halacha follows Abaye rather than Rava. Ya'al Kagam. So the Ya'al Kagam is the Menamini can tell us the 6 places where the halacha follows Abaye, not Rava. And the Lamed stands for Lechi. This machlokes, halacha follows Abai. Ya'el or Ya'al. Ya'al. So Lamed stands for Lechi. Okay, so we're starting the Mishnah now, in the bottom of 15a4. Bakoi loisin lechoin. We may make lechis out of anything, I guess any material. Afilu b'davo shesh b'ruach chaim. Even a living animal, a live animal, can stand there. Rabbi Meir prohibits using a live animal as a lechi. And a living thing transmit tuma as a tomb cover. So it says, what's the problem with that? Let's look at 31. The version is printed in Mishnah, so basically in place of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that a partition which owes its erectness to its life force, putting an animal there, live animal, is not a valid partition, since the life force that keeps it erect is not a tangible substance. This is how goylel is rendered by Rashi. Although living creatures other than humans are generally not susceptible to tumah, they do become tumah if used as a tomb cover, and continue to transmit tumah even if they are removed from the tomb. So, if somebody would use a live animal to cover a tomb, he would now not only become tumah but also transmit tumah. So therefore, Rabbi Meir prohibits using a live animal as a lechi. Rabbi Meir declares a Torah, it does not transmit tumah. Meir would say that although you shouldn't be using it, but it does not transmit tumah. The Mishnah doesn't tell us yet who is the Tana that says that it transmits tumah. We may write a bill of divorce on living things. Reisi Aglili invalidates a bill of divorce written on a living thing for a reason that will be explained in the Gemara. It's like, imagine you write a bill of divorce on a cow and then gives it to the woman. The Gemara cites a brisa similar. So we have 2 opinions. One says that said it's okay, and Rabbi Aglili says it's not. Tanya of Meir called Dosh Buachim, I see no so like different the sukkah, velo lechil mavi, like passing vi rois, or like kever. So Rabbi Aglili, Fein kois malogidi anoshim. So Meir says anything that is alive, we don't use it for a wall to the sukkah, we don't use it as a lechi for a mavi, we don't use it as boards to enclose whales, and not to cover a tomb. If used to cover a tomb, it does not assume the status of a tomb cover and remains tahor. That's the opinion of Rabbi Aglili. the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili says you should not use a living animal as to write on it the bill of divorce. Okay. My time with Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What is the reason of Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Why not? Why are you not allowed to write a bill of divorce on a living animal? Tanyo Sefer and the Ella Sefer. Because it says because of law Sefer Kritus. He has to, when someone wants to get divorced, he has to write a book of divorce. It has to be a book, Sefer. A parchment document. I would not know from this word then that a parchment document is valid for writing a bill of divorce. Minai l'Rabbi is called Dover. From where do I know to include everything that a bill of divorce may be written on other surfaces? Talmud Lemar v'chosav lo mikol mokim. And the verse says v'chosav lo, and he shall write for her on any manner of writing surface. Imken ma Talmud Lemar sefer. So if so, what does the pasuk include? Writing surfaces other than parchment. What does the verse teach by stating a parchment document, which implies a limitation to a parchment alone? This comes to teach you the following limitation. What is a parchment? What is the common denominator to a sefer? That it's something that is not alive, has no life, and is not a food. So too, a bill of divorce may be written on anything that has no life and is not a food. This would exclude writing the bill of divorce on a live animal, and is the scriptural basis for Rabbi Yossi Aglili's ruling. Why you shouldn't write a bill of divorce on a living animal. The rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yossi Aglili and permit writing a bill of divorce on a live animal must explain these verses differently. It is written in the verse that he shall write the bill of divorce in the sefer. Sefer kesiv, it is written, rather a sefer. So this word comes to denote a mere narration of words, a formula of severance. You look at number 6, it says, the word sefer can be used in the sense of a narration or formula. Had the verse stated v'chosa l'krisus ba'sefer, we would have no choice but to render, and he shall write for her a severance in a parchment scroll. But now that the Torah orders the words as v'chosav lo sefer kritus, we can render it, and he shall write for her a formula of severance, a formula that severs the bond between them. This places no limitation on the type of writing surface suitable for bill of divorce. This comes to denote a mere narration of words, a formula of severance. What the rabbis will do with the words in the pasuk v'chosav lo, he shall write to her, since according to the rabbis there is no verse to restrict the type of writing surface, meaning you can use any surface for writing the bill of divorce. How do they explain the need for the Torah to add these words, which according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili teach the validity of writing surfaces other than parchment? The verse is needed to stress that through writing is a woman divorced, but she cannot be divorced through money, by the husband's giving the sum of money to her and stating that this should affect the divorce. It might have entered your mind to say, it would have entered my mind to say that since leaving, i.e., divorce, is compared by the Torah to being, marriage, just as being is affected through money, so to living may be affected not only through writing but also through money. marriage, you have to have kesef. To one of the ways to get married is so we have to have a kesef. So yeah, I would think that also when when she gets divorced, the actual divorce happens through money. Kamashmalan, therefore, the verse, and he shall write for her, teaches that only a written instrument may be used for divorce. Rabbi Saglili, from where does he know this concept that a written instrument alone can affect divorce, despite the Torah's comparison of marriage and divorce procedures? He derives it from the words, a document of severance, which emphasize sefer koilso. A document severs her from her husband, but nothing else. Money is not the one to sever her from him, to separate her from him. How then do the rabbis, who already derive the sole validity of writing from another source, account for the juxtaposition of a word, a formula of severance? And according to the rabbis, this expression of formula of severance is needed. For the law, that the bill of divorce must be a thing that completely severs the bond between him and her. The husband must not include any conditions that preserve some residual ties between him and his wife. That is, these words are not needed for that which is taught in the following. It says, the husband must not include any conditions that preserve some residual ties between him and his wife. That is, these words are needed. These words are needed for that which is taught in the following Baisa. If a man hands his wife a bill of divorce and tells her, this is your bill of divorce on condition that you do not drink wine, or another condition, that you do not go to your father's house, if forever, if these conditions have no limit, have no time limit, it doesn't say how long she should not be drinking wine, or how long she should not be going to her father's house. This is not severance, and the divorce is invalid. But if it has, let's say, a time limit of 30 days, specified time limit, this is a severance, and the divorce is effective immediately, subject to the conditions he has imposed. How then Rabbi Menashe, who expounds the juxtaposition of the words, a document of severance, differently, how would he know the law that divorce must affect an absolute severance? Because in other words, there's no ties after the divorce, a complete separation. And how does he know it? Rabbi Menashe derives this law from the fact that the Torah could have used the shorter word kores. Why did the Torah use the word krisus, but instead use the longer word krisus? Since either word conveys the same idea. The Torah uses the longer word, indicates an additional law to be derived from it. The rabbis, however, do not expound the Torah's abandoning the shorter word kores in favor of the longer word krisus. Rabban don't expound on it to say it could be written either way. There's no special teaching. They hold that the Torah's preference, it says in note 14, they hold that the Torah's preference of this particular expression does not necessarily indicate any additional law. Going into the Mishnah, in page 30, 50b2, in the English side, the Mishnah gives the basic requirement of a partition. Carrying is permitted on the Shabbos only in an area enclosed by partition which conform to these requirements. What's the requirement of partition? If a caravan, a group of traveling people, encamped in an open field, and they surrounded the open field, their encampment, with a barricade of animal trappings, saddlebags, maybe the wagons. They didn't mention the wagons, but idea is they surrounded themselves with all these animals, not the animals themselves, but the animals' trappings, things you trap the animal with, like the saddles and the saddlebags. If you're able to create a wall of 10 tefachim with those animal trappings, you're allowed to carry inside this area, meaning it becomes shusayochid. They may carry within it, provided that the barricade is at least 10 tefachim high. And the gaps in the barricades are not larger than the solid part. The gaps should be small. The total width of the gaps in the partition does not exceed the total width of the solid parts. The solid parts are more than the gaps. Any gap that is 10 amis wide or less is permitted, because it is regarded as an entrance. Also, but if it's larger than 10 amis, then it's not considered a Pesach anymore. So you're creating before Shabbos. You don't get stuck in the middle of the desert, let's say. You're traveling with a bunch of horses, and you know that Shabbos is coming, and you want to be able to carry. So what do? You put all the saddlebags around, or even the things that you carrying on the animals. As long as it's 10 tefachim high, the gaps between this enclosure that you're creating is not more than 10, meaning that you have more solid than gaps. That's condition number 2. And the Pesach, wherever you make the opening, should not be more than 10 amis. That's the Mishnah. Now, we'll go to the Gemara. The status of a partition in which the gaps are exactly equal to the side section is subject of the following Gemara dispute. So now, speaking about another case, what happened when the gaps are just as much as the solid, meaning the gaps and the solid are exactly the same. We said that if the gaps are larger, makes the enclosure invalid. If there's less than the solid, it's valid. Now, what happens if it's exactly the same? If the gaps in a partition equal to the walled portion, Rav Papa says muta. It is permitted to carry in an area enclosed by such partitions. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, says also it is forbidden to carry there. Papa says that carrying is permitted. Because this is what the merciful one taught Moshe Rabbeinu regarding the area to be a partition. Do not leave most of it open. A partition is invalid only if it's mostly open, but a partition which is only half open is valid. Ravuna, the son of Yeshua, said it's prohibited. The carrying is prohibited in such a case where it's evenly open and solid are even. He says this is what the merciful one taught Moshe regarding the area to be partitioned. Fence in most of it. A partition must be mostly solid. If its gaps equal to its solid sections, is invalid. So we have two opinions. We have the opinion of our Papa, who says it would be okay, it would be permissible to carry in such an enclosure where the gaps and the solid parts are even. Rav Huna Bredi Rav Yeshua would say that it's prohibited. Tenan, but we learned in the Mishnah, carrying is permitted within the barricade, provided that the gaps in the barricade are not longer than the solid parts. This implies hakebin and muta, but if the gaps are equal to the solid parts, then carrying is permitted. This proves a partition whose gaps are solid parts are equal is valid, like Rav Papa said. The Gemara says, Lo tema, do not say that the Mishnah means to imply, kebinyan muto, but if the gaps are equal to the solid parts, then carrying is permitted. Ela ema, rather you can say something else. If the solid part exceeds the gaps, then carrying is permitted. You can word it differently. You don't have to say that it's permissible. You can say only if the building is more, if the solid exceeds the gaps, then it's permitted. Aval kebinyan mai, but if the gaps are equal to the solid parts, what then is the law? Also, carrying is prohibited. If so, the Mishnah should instead teach, Lo iyu pirtzis kabinyan. Carrying is permitted, provided that the gaps in the barricade do not equal the solid parts, which would leave no room for a doubt, for drawing an erroneous inference. Why does the Mishnah doesn't speak about this case? Kasha, this is difficulty that cannot easily be resolved. Tashma, the Gemara presents another proof. One who covers his sukkah with spits or with the sides of a bed frame, items which are not fit for use as a schach. You can't use the schach with a sides of a bed. So in 24, these items are utensils in their completed form, and as such are susceptible to become tameh. Items that are susceptible to tuma are not valid for use as a schach, a sukkah roof. You cannot use it as schach. If there is a space between the items, as wide as the items themselves, and these gaps are filled with materials which are fit for use as a schach, keshera, the sukkah is valid. We see, therefore, that only half of the roof of a sukkah has to be of the proper materials, not its majority. The same should apply to partitions on Shabbos. This supports the opinion of our Papa that only half of a partition has to be solid, not the majority. The Gemara rejects this proof. The Gemara says, in this Mishnah, with what case are we dealing? Shenichnas v'yetz, in a case where a spit could go in and out of each gap easily, meaning the gaps between the spits are large enough to allow for the unhindered insertion and removal of similar spits. Consequently, the gaps are actually wider than the spits themselves. Not the same, but wider. And when these gaps are filled with valid materials, most of the roof will be covered with a valid schach. So you cannot use it as a proof for our case. The Gemara says, but 1 second, but it is possible to be exact and make the gaps exactly equal to the spits. Therefore, when the Mishnah says that the gaps between the spits are as wide as the spits themselves, it should be understood literally that the width of the gaps exactly equals to the width of the spits, no more and not less. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Ami b'ma'adef. Nevertheless, the Mishnah deals with one who enlarges the size of the gaps to slightly more than the width of the spits. Even though it is possible for two areas to be identical in size, the Mishnah may still be interpreted to mean that the areas are not identical in size, but rather the gaps are slightly larger than the spit themselves. With this would prove the opinion of Rav Huna. Rava Omar, if the spits were placed crosswise, then he places the valid schach lengthwise across the top of the spits. And if the spits were placed lengthwise, then he places the valid schach crosswise across the top of the spits. The valid schach is placed pre-pendacular to the spits, so that it necessarily overlaps the spits. In this way, although the spaces between the spits are exactly as wide as the spits themselves, the total amount of valid schach exceeds the total amount of invalid spits. The sukkah is then a valid sukkah. The Gemara presents another proof. It says in 30, because the larger amount of valid schach legally nullifies the smaller amount of invalid schach, and that's why it's kosher. But so therefore, we have to try to find another case that would support either of Papa or Rav Huna. Tashma, come learn a proof from the following: if a caravan camped in an open field, that was our case to begin with. But over here it says about gemalin, about camels, and they surrounded it, their encampment, with barricade made with camels with saddles, creating an enclosure. Camels with saddles, ba'avitin, b'shlifim, with cushions, with bundles, bekonim, bekolchois, with reeds, vegetable stalks, metaltalin, b'seicho, they may carry within this enclosure, wilvad shelo yeh ben gomel legomel k'mloi gomel, provided that there is not between one camel and the next a gap, the width of a camel, uven ukaf leukaf k'mloi ukaf, no, between one saddle and the next, the width of a saddle. No, between one cushion and the next, the width of a cushion. This implies that carrying is prohibited in an area enclosed by partition whose gaps are equal to their solid sections. And that supports the view of Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua. Carrying is prohibited. So that was exactly the opinion of Rav Huna. Rav Papa is the one that said it's kosher. So the Gemara says, Achanami, here too it is possible that the Baisa refers to a case where the gap between the one object and the next is so wide that a similar object goes in and out of it easily. Consequently, the gaps are in fact slightly larger than the side partition, parts of partition, and that's why it's forbidden. So it's not really a proof to Rav Huna. And we'll continue this tomorrow. We're holding by Tashma. Ruchim to you.